that allowed us to build a post-World War II order with other democracies. An order based not just on military power or national affiliations, but built on principles: the rule of law, human rights, freedom of religion and speech and assembly, and an independent press. That order is now being challenged. First, by violent fanatics who claim to speak for Islam. More recently, by autocrats in foreign capitals who see free markets and open democracies and civil society itself as a threat to their power. The peril each poses to our democracy is more far-reaching than a car bomb or a missile. They represent the fear of change, the fear of people who look or speak or pray differently, a contempt for the rule of law that holds leaders accountable, an intolerance of dissent and free thought, a belief that the sword or the gun or the bomb or the propaganda machine is the ultimate arbiter of what's true and what's right. Because of the extraordinary courage of our men and women in uniform, because of our intelligence officers and law enforcement and diplomats who support our troops, no foreign terrorist organization has successfully planned and executed an attack on our homeland these past 8 years. And although Boston and Orlando and San Bernardino and Fort Hood remind us of how dangerous radicalization can be, our law enforcement agencies are more effective and vigilant than ever. We have taken out tens of thousands of terrorists, including bin Laden. The global coalition we're leading against ISIL has taken out their leaders and taken away about half their territory. ISIL will be destroyed, and no one who threatens America will ever be safe. And to all who serve or have served, it has been the honor of my lifetime to be your commander-in-chief. And we all owe you a deep debt of gratitude. But protecting our way of life, that's not just the job of our military. Democracy can buckle when it gives in to fear. So just as we, as citizens, must remain vigilant against external aggression, we must guard against a weakening of the values that make us who we are. And that's why for the past 8 years, I've worked to put the fight against terrorism on a firmer legal footing. That's why we've ended torture, worked to close Gitmo, reformed our laws governing surveillance to protect privacy and civil liberties. That's why I reject discrimination against Muslim Americans, who are just as patriotic as we are. That's why we cannot withdraw. That's why we cannot withdraw from big global fights to expand democracy and human rights and women's rights and LGBT rights. No matter how imperfect our efforts, no matter how expedient ignoring such values may seem, That's part of defending America. For the fight against extremism and intolerance and sectarianism and chauvinism are of a piece with the fight against authoritarianism and nationalist aggression. If the scope of freedom and respect for the rule of law shrinks around the world, the likelihood of war within and between nations increases. And our own freedoms will eventually be threatened. So let's be vigilant, but not afraid. ISIL will try to kill innocent people. But they cannot defeat America unless we betray our Constitution and our principles in the fight. Rivals like Russia or China cannot match our influence around the world unless we give up what we stand for and turn ourselves into just another big country that bullies smaller neighbors. Which brings me to my final point. Our democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. All of us, regardless of party, should be throwing ourselves into the task of rebuilding our democratic institutions. When voting rates in America are some of the lowest among advanced democracies, we should be making it easier, not harder, to vote. When trust in our institutions is low, we should reduce the corrosive influence of money in our politics and insist on the principles of transparency and ethics in public service. When Congress is dysfunctional, we should draw our congressional districts to encourage politicians to cater to common sense and not rigid extremes. But remember, none of this happens on its own. All of this depends on our participation, on each of us accepting the responsibility of citizenship, regardless of which way the pendulum of power happens to be swinging. Our Constitution is a remarkable, beautiful gift. But it's really just a piece of parchment. It has no power on its own. We, the people, give it power. We, the people, give it meaning with our participation and with the choices that we make and the alliances that we forge. Whether or not we stand up for our freedoms, whether or not we respect and enforce the rule of law, that's up to us. America's no fragile thing, but the gains of our long journey to freedom are not assured. In his own farewell address, George Washington wrote that self-government is the underpinning of our safety, prosperity, and liberty. But from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. And so we have to preserve this truth with jealous anxiety that we should reject the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties that make us one. America, we weaken those ties when we allow our political dialogue to become so corrosive that people of good character aren't even willing to enter into public service. So coarse with rancor that Americans with whom we disagree are seen not just as misguided, but as malevolent. We weaken those ties when we define some of us as more American than others. When we write off the whole system as inevitably corrupt. And when we sit back and blame the leaders we elect without examining our own role in electing them. It falls to each of us to be those anxious, jealous guardians of our democracy. To embrace the joyous task we've been given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours. Because for all our outward differences, we in fact all share the same proud title. The most important office in a democracy. Citizen. Citizen. So you see, that's what our democracy demands. It needs you. Not just when there's an election, not just when your own narrow interest is at stake, but over the full span of a lifetime. If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life. If something needs fixing, then lace up your shoes and do some organizing. If you're disappointed by your elected officials, grab a clipboard, get some signatures, and run for office yourself. Show up. Dive in. Stay at it. Sometimes you'll win. Sometimes you'll lose. Presuming a reservoir of goodness in other people, that can be a risk. And there will be times when the process will disappoint you. But for those of us fortunate enough to have been part of this work and to see it up close, let me tell you, it can energize and inspire. And more often than not, your faith in America and in Americans will be confirmed. Mine sure has been. Over the course of these 8 years, I've seen the hopeful faces of young graduates and our newest military officers. I have mourned with grieving families, searching for answers, and found grace in Charleston Church. I've seen our scientists help a paralyzed man regain his sense of touch. I've seen wounded warriors who at points were given up for dead walk again. I've seen our doctors and volunteers rebuild after earthquakes and stop pandemics in their tracks. I've seen the youngest of children remind us through their actions and through their generosity of our obligations to care for refugees or work for peace. And above all, to look out for each other. So that faith that I placed all those years ago, not far from here, in the power of ordinary Americans to bring about change, that faith has been rewarded in ways I could not have possibly imagined. And I hope your faith has too. Some of you here tonight or watching at home, you were there with us in 2004, in 2008, 2012. Maybe you still can't believe we pulled this whole thing off. Let me tell you, you're not the only ones. Michelle, girl of the South Side. For the past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend. You took on a role you didn't ask for, and you made it your own, with grace and with grit and with style and good humor. You made the White House a place that belongs to everybody. And a new generation sets its sights higher because it has you as a role model. So you have made me proud, and you have made the country proud. Malia and Sasha, under the strangest of circumstances, you have become two amazing young women. You are smart and you are beautiful, but more importantly, you are kind and you are thoughtful and you are full of passion. And you wore the burden of years in the spotlight so easily. Of all that I have done in my life, I am most proud to be your dad. To Joe Biden, the scrappy kid from Scranton, who became Delaware's favorite son. You were the first decision I made as a nominee, and it was the best. Not just because you have been a great vice president, but because in the bargain I gained a brother. And we love you and Jill like family, and your friendship has been one of the great joys of our lives. To my remarkable staff, for 8 years, and for some of you a whole lot more, I have drawn from your energy. And every day I try to reflect back what you displayed: heart and character and idealism. I've watched you grow up, get married, have kids, start incredible new journeys of your own. Even when times got tough and frustrating, you never let Washington get the better of you. You guarded against cynicism. And the only thing that makes me prouder than all the good that we've done is the thought of all the amazing things that you are going to achieve from here. And to all of you out there, every organizer who moved to an unfamiliar town, every kind family who welcomed them in, every volunteer who knocked on doors, every young person who cast a ballot for the first time, every American who lived and breathed the hard work of change, you are the best supporters and organizers anybody could ever hope for, and I will be forever grateful. Because you did change the world. You did. And that's why I leave this stage tonight even more optimistic about this country than when we started. Because I know our work has not only helped so many Americans, it has inspired so many Americans, especially so many young people out there, to believe that you can make a difference, to hitch your wagon to something bigger than yourselves. Let me tell you, this generation coming up, unselfish, altruistic, creative, patriotic, I've seen you in every corner of the country. You believe in a fair and just and inclusive America. You know that constant change has been America's hallmark, that it's not something to fear, but something to embrace. You are willing to carry this hard work of democracy forward. You'll soon outnumber all of us, and I believe as a result, the future is in good hands. My fellow Americans, it has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. In fact, I will be right there with you as a citizen for all my remaining days. But for now, whether you are young or whether you're young at heart, I do have one final ask of you as your president. The same thing I asked when you took a chance on me 8 years ago. I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. I'm asking you to hold fast to that faith written into our founding documents, that idea whispered by slaves and abolitionists, that spirit sung by immigrants and homesteaders and those who marched for justice, that creed reaffirmed by those who planted flags from foreign battlefields to the surface of the moon. A creed at the core of every American whose story is not yet written. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. May God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
President Obama ending on the mantra that carried him into office 8 years ago, yes we can, speaking to a packed crowd here at McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago, his official farewell speech, looking on the First Lady Michelle Obama, who got the biggest applause of the night. Also Vice President Joe Biden and Dr. Jill Biden, who he singled out as deep and close and personal friends and partner, calling Vice President Biden a brother. Here's the First Lady and Malia Obama now joining the president on stage. Dr. Biden and Vice President Joe Biden coming up to thank the president. Kristen Walker is with me. He's been watching this speech. Kristen, this seemed like a speech that was laying the seed for a president who is going to become and continue to be very active in trying to support his party and these ideals.
I think you're right, Lester. He ended on that note. Yes, we can. This was, as you would expect, a defense of his legacy, but it was also a call to action to the American people and I think to his successor to defend this democracy. He talked about how fragile the nation's democracy is. I thought one of the most poignant moments was when the audience booed President-elect Trump and he said, no, key to our democracy is a peaceful transition.
Chuck Todd's watching along with us in New York. Chuck, what are your thoughts here as you hear the president thanking his staff, thanking America?
I think we got to focus on the content. I think it's a remarkable moment in our history, and it underscores the tumultuous time we live in that the president of the United States, the outgoing president, felt the need to use his farewell address to not just make the case for democracy for the world to hear, but to remake the case for democracy for Americans to hear. I think that was in part, obviously, a response to what we're seeing right now in our politics, but also an attempt to serve as a beacon, really, for the Democratic Party going forward and for his supporters going forward, which is why he ended up ending on an upbeat note. But let's not forget the meat of this speech. This was, in many cases, a president lamenting the state of our democracy right now in his farewell address.
President Obama knew that January 20th, 2017 would come, but he didn't know who he would be handing the keys over to, of course, until the last election. I sat down with the president here in Chicago just about an hour and a half ago, and I asked him about the results of that election and his reaction. Here's part of our exchange.
Tell me what happened that night, watching those results, when you realized that Donald Trump was going to win. Was there an unvarnished Barack Obama at that moment?
You know, there was just surprise. You know, generally speaking, not just me, but my team have been pretty good at seeing something coming. And you know, partly because just the polling was so off and the data was off, there was a surprise. You know, I think the president-elect would be the first to acknowledge he didn't run a conventional campaign. And it's not clear that he or his team thought they were going to win. And so I think more than anything, it was just surprise.
President Obama, in a conversation we had a while ago, Kristen, he talks about that moment, but he had to the next day, of course, go in and talk to his staff, and he has tried to take the high road in this, but he's clearly hurting.
He is, and you could see him feel that and express that in his response to you there, Lester, which was really striking. He has talked about, on the day after election, the importance of a peaceful and smooth transition. He has instructed his White House team to make sure that, in fact, happens. But we know that this is a challenge for him, and that was present in his remarks this evening when he called on not only this crowd, but the nation, his successor, to reject hyperpartisanship, to reject discrimination in all of its forms. He referenced Muslims, and that a clear counter to some of the rhetoric that we heard on the campaign trail. You can bet, though, that he will remain engaged, Lester.
Chuck Todd, when we were on the set on election night, as it was clear that Hillary Clinton was going down to defeat, I think it was you that posed the question to the panel, who now becomes a leader of the Democratic Party? Right. Watching President Obama, how strong a force will he come now in trying to rebuild the Democratic Party?
Well, look, he is the animating force inside the Democratic Party. He is the guy that can convene folks. He is the guy that can organize the party. I think he's reluctant to have to be the leader going forward, but it's my understanding he realizes that there's really nobody else right now, that it's a placeholder, but that he has got to fill this vacuum. He's got to be careful here. You don't want to you don't want to get too involved. There's a fine line you walk as a former president doing that, but I think he is accepting, and I think tonight's speech is a part of that. He is accepting this idea that he is now and still has to remain the leader of the Democratic Party.
And he, of course, noted the peaceful transfer of power that is about to take place in this country. We're going to hear from President-elect Trump and his vision perhaps a bit more tomorrow in his first news conference since his election. A programming note, we hope you'll join us Friday night at 9 Central for my extended interview with President Obama. You saw some of it there a moment ago. Tomorrow morning for President-elect Trump's first news conference since winning the election. For now, I'm